Home by Langston Hughes. When the boy came back, there were bright stickers and tags in strange languages the home folks couldn't read all over his bags and on his violin case. They were the marks of custom stations at faraway borders, big hotels in European cities, and steamers that crossed the ocean a long way from Hopkinsville. They made the leather-colored bags and black violin case look very gay and circus-like. They made white people on the train wonder about the brown-skinned young man to whom the baggage belonged. And when he got off at a village station in Missouri, the loafers gathered around in a crowd staring. Roy Williams had come home from abroad to visit his folks, his mother and sister and brothers who still remained in the old hometown. Roy had been away for 7 or 8 years, wandering the world. He came back very well dressed, but awfully thin. He wasn't well. It was this illness that had made Roy come home, really. He had a feeling that he was going to die, and he wanted to see his mother again. This feeling about death had been coming over him gradually for 2 or 3 years now. It seemed to him that it must have started in Vienna, that gay but dying city in Central Europe where so many people were hungry, and yet some still had money to buy champagne and caviar and women in the nightclubs where Roy's orchestra played. But the glimmering curtains of Roy's jazz were lined with death. It made him sick to see people fainting in the streets of Vienna from hunger, while others stuffed themselves with wine and food. And it made him sad to refuse the young white women trailing behind him when he came home from work late at night, offering their bodies for a little money to buy something to eat. In Vienna, Roy had a room to himself because he wanted to study and to keep up his music. He studied under one of the best violin teachers, but it was hard to keep beautiful and hungry women out of his place, who wanted to give themselves to a man who had a job because in turn the man might let them sleep in his room or toss them a few bills to take home from their starving parents. Folks catch hell in Europe, Roy thought. I never saw people as hungry as this, not even Negroes at home. But it was even worse when the orchestra moved back to Berlin. Behind the apparent solidity of that great city, behind doors where tourists never passed, hunger and pain were beyond understanding, and the police were beating people who protested or stole or begged. Yet in the cabaret where Roy played, crowds of folks still spent good gold. They laughed and danced every night, and didn't give a damn about the children sleeping in doorways outside, or the men who built houses of packing boxes, or the women who walked the streets to pick up trade. It was in Berlin that the sadness weighed most heavily on Roy, and it was there that he began to cough. One night in Prague, he had had a hemorrhage. When he got to Paris, his girlfriend took care of him, and he got better. But he had all the time from then on that feeling that he was going to die. The cough stayed, and the sadness. So he came home to see his mother. He landed in New York on the day that Hoover drove the veterans out of Washington. He stayed a couple of days in Harlem. Most of his old friends there, musicians and actors, were hungry and out of work. When they saw Roy dressed so well, they asked him for money. At night, women whispered in the streets, "Come here, baby. I want to see you, darling." Rotten everywhere, Roy thought. I want to go home. That last night in Harlem, he couldn't sleep. He thought of his mother. In the morning, he sent her a telegram that he was on his way. An uppity nigger, the white folks, when they saw him standing slim and elegant on the station platform in the September sunlight, surrounded by his bags with bright stickers. Roy had got off a Pullman, something unusual for a Negro in those parts. "God damn," said the white loafers. Suddenly a nasal voice broke out. "Well, I'll be dogged if it ain't Roy Williams." Roy recognized an old playmate, Charlie Mumford, from across the alley, a tall, red-necked white boy in overalls. He took off his glove and held out his hand. The white man took it, but he didn't shake it long. Roy had forgotten he wasn't in Europe, wearing gloves and shaking hands glibly with a white man. "Damn." "Where you been, boy?" the white fellow asked. "Paris," said Roy. "What'd you come back for?" a half-southern voice drawled from the edge of a baggage truck. "I wanted to come home," Roy said, "to see my mother." "I hope she's gladder to see you than we are," answered another white voice drawled. Roy picked up his bags, since there were no porters, and carried them toward a rusty old Ford that seemed to be a taxi. He felt dizzy and weak. The smoke and dust of travel had made him cough a lot. The eyes of the white men about the station were not kind. He heard someone mutter, "Nigger." His skin burned. For the first time in half a dozen years, He felt his color. He was home. Sing a song of 3. Sing a song of Dixie, cotton bursting in the sun, shade of chinaberry trees, persimmons after frost had fallen, hounds treeing possums, October nights, oh sweet potatoes, hot with butter in their yellow hearts. Son, I'm glad you's done come home. What can Ma cook for you? I know you's hungry for some real food, cornbread and greens and salt pork. Lord, you got some mighty nice clothes, honey, but you looks right thin. Child, I hope you's gonna stay home a while. These colored girls here'll go crazy for you. They're fighting over you already. Honey, when you plays that violin of yourn, it makes me right weak. It's so purty. Play your violin, boy. God's done give you a gift. Yes, indeedy. It's funny how all these Hopkinsville white folks has heard about you already. The women where your sister works say she read someplace about that orchestra you was playing with in Paris. She says for sister to bring you up to the house to play for her sometime. I told sister, no indeedy, you don't go around playing at nobody's house. Told her to tell that white woman the deacon's board arranging a concert at the church for where everybody can come and pay 25 cents and to the glory of God and hear you play. Ain't that right, son? You gonna play for the Lord here in Hopkinsville. You've been playing for the devil every night all over Europey. Jesus have mercy. Let me go and get my washing out. And while you's practicing, I'm gonna make you a pumpkin pie this afternoon. I can see your mouth a-watering now. Honey, Ma's sure glad you's done come home. Play your violin, son. 4. Caprice Venoise, air for G string, Sonata in A, Ave Maria, the Gypsy Dances. What little house anywhere was ever big enough to hold Brahms and Beethoven, Bach and César Franck? Certainly not Sister Sarah Williams' house in Hopkinsville. When Roy played ill as he was, the notes were bursting out of the windows, and the colored folks and the white folks in the street heard them. The classic Mr. Brahms coming out of a nigger's house in the southern end of Missouri. Oh my God, play your violin, Roy. Tonight's your concert. The deacons and the ladies' aid sold a lot of tickets to the white folks they worked for. Roy's homecoming concert at Shiloh Church was a financial success. The front rows were 50 cents and filled with white folks. The rest of the seats were a quarter and filled with Negroes. Methodist and Baptist both came, forgetting churchy rivalry. And there were lots of colored girls with powdered bonbon faces, sweet black and brown and yellow girls with red mouths pointed at Roy. There was lots of bustle and perfume, and smothered giggling and whispered talk as the drab little church filled. New shoes screeched up and down the aisles. People applauded because it was past the hour, but the concert started colored folks' time anyhow, late. The church was crowded. Hello, Mr. Brahms on a violin from Vienna at a colored church in Hopkinsville, Missouri. The slender brown skin hands of a sick young man making you sing for an audience of poor white folks and even poorer Negroes. Good evening, Mr. Brahms. A long ways from home, traveling in answer to your dream, singing across the world. I had a dream too, Mr. Brahms, a big dream that can't come true now. Dream of a great stage and a huge hall like Carnegie Hall or the Salle Gaveau. And you, Mr. Brahms, singing out into the darkness, singing so strong and true that 1,000 people look me up like they do at Roland Hayes singing the Crucifixion. Jesus, I dreamed like that once before I got sick and had to come home. And here I am, giving my first concert in America for my mother and the deacons of Shiloh Church and the quarter and 50-cent pieces they've collected from Brahms and me for the glory of God. This ain't Carnegie Hall. I've only just come home, but they're looking at me. They're all looking at me, the white folks in the front rows and the Negroes in the back, like one pair of eyes looking at me. This, my friends, I should say, ladies and gentlemen, there are white folks in the audience who are not my friends. This is the meditation from Thais by Massenet. This is the broken heart of a dream, come true, not true. This is music and me sitting on the doorstep of the world needing you. Oh, body of life and love with black hands and brown limbs and white breasts and a golden face with lips like a violin bowed for singing. Steady, Roy. It's hot in this crowded church and you're sick as hell. This is the dream and the dreamer wandering in the desert from Hopkinsville to Vienna in love with a streetwalker named Music. Listen, you bitch. I want you to be beautiful as the moon in the night on the edge of the Missouri hills. I'll make you beautiful. The meditation from Thias. You remember, Ma. Even to hear me play, you've got your seat in the amen corner tonight, like on Sunday mornings when you come to talk to God. You remember that Chrysler record we had on the phonograph with the big horn when I was a kid? Nobody liked it but me, but you didn't care how many times I played it, over and over. Where'd you get my violin? Half the time you didn't have the money to pay old man Miller for my lesson every week. God rest his unpaid soul, as the Catholics say. Why did you cry, Ma, when I went away with the minstrel show, playing coon songs through the South instead of hymns? Why did you cry for Ma? What did you cry for, Ma, when I wrote you I had a job with a nightclub jazz band on State Street in Chicago? Why did you pray all night when I told you we had a contract to go to Berlin and work in a cabaret there? I tried to explain to you that the best violin teachers in the world were in Berlin and that I'd come back playing like the Chrysler record on the old Victrola. And I didn't send you money home. And didn't I send you money home? Spray like sand in the eyes. Oh, dream on the doorstep of the world. Thias. You sure don't look like Thias, you scrawny white woman in a cheap coat and red hat staring up at me from the first row. You don't look a bit like Thias. What is it you want the music to give you? What do you want from me? This is Hopkinsville, Missouri. Look at all those brown girls back there in the crowd of Negroes, leaning toward me and the music. First time most of them ever saw a man in evening clothes, black or white. First time most of them ever heard the meditation from Thias. First time they ever had one of their own race come home from abroad playing a violin. See them looking proud at me and music over the heads of the white folks in the first rows, over the head of the white woman in a cheap coat and red hat who knows what music's all about. Who are you, lady? When the concert was over, even some of the white folks shook Roy's hand and said it was wonderful. The colored folks said, "Boy, you sure can play." Roy was shaking a little and his eyes burned, and he wanted terribly to cough. Pain shot across his shoulders, but he smiled his concert jazz band smile, and that the gold spending ladies of the European nightclubs had liked so much, and he held out a feverish hand to everybody. The white woman in the red hat waited at the edge of the crowd. When people thinned out a little from the pulpit, she came to Roy and shook his hand. He spoke of symphony concerts in St. Louis, of the fact that she was a teacher of music, of piano and violin, but that she had no pupils like Roy, that never in the town of Hopkinsville had anyone else played so beautifully. Roy looked into her thin, freckled face and was glad she knew what it was all about. He was glad she liked music. "That's Miss Reese," his mother told him after she had gone, "an old maid musicianer at the White High School." "Yes'm," Roy said. "She understands music." 6. The next time he saw Miss Reese was at the White High School shortly after it opened, the fall session. One morning a note had come asking him if he would play for her senior class in music appreciation someday. She would accompany him if he would bring his music. It seemed that one of Miss Reese's duties was raising the musical standards in Hopkinsville. She had been telling her students about Bach and Mozart, and she would so appreciate it if Roy would visit the school and play those two great masters for her young people. She wrote him a nice note on clean white paper. Roy went. His mother thought it was a great honor for the White High School to send for her colored son to play for them. That Miss Reese is a right nice woman," Sister Williams said to her boy. sending for you to play up there at the school. First time I ever knowed 'em to have a Negro in there for anything but cleaning up, and I've been in Hopkinsville a long time. Go and play for 'em, son." To the glory of God, Roy played, but it was one of those days when his throat was hot and dry and his eyes burned. He had been coughing all morning, and as he played, his breath left him, and he stood covered with a damp sweat. He played badly, but Miss Reese was more than kind to him. She accompanied him on the piano, and when he had finished, she turned to the assembled class of white kids sprawled in their seats and said, "This is art, my dear young people. This is true art." The students went home that afternoon and told their parents that a dressed-up nigger had come to school with a violin and played a lot of funny pieces nobody but Miss Reese liked. They went on to say that Miss Reese had grinned all over herself and cried, "Wonderful," and had even bowed to the nigger when he went out. Roy went home to bed. He was up and down these days, thinner and thinner, all the time weaker and weaker, sometimes not practicing anymore, often not eating the food his mother cooked for him or that his sister brought from where she worked, sometimes being restless and hot in the night and getting up and dressing, even to spats and yellow gloves, and walking the streets of the little town at 10 and 11 o'clock after nearly everyone else had gone to bed. Midnight was late in Hopkinsville, but for years Roy had worked at night. It was hard for him to sleep before morning now, but one night he walked out of the house for the last time. The moon had risen, and Roy scarcely needed to light the oil lamp to dress by when he got up. The moon shone into his little room across the white counterpane of his bed. Down into the bags with the bright stickers piled against the wall, it glistened on the array of medicine bottles on the side table. But Roy lighted the light, the better to see himself in the warped mirror of the dresser. Ashy pale his face was, but had once been brown. His cheeks were sunken. Trembling, he had put on his suit and spats and his yellow gloves and soft felt hat. He got into an overcoat. He took a cane that he carried lately, from weakness rather than from style, and he went out into the autumn moonlight. Tiptoeing through the parlor, he heard his mother snoring on the couch there. She had given up her room to him. The front door was still unlocked. His brothers, Roy thought, were out with their girlfriends. His sister had gone to bed. In the streets it was very quiet, misty with moonlight. The trees stood half-clad in autumn leaves. Roy walked under the dry falling leaves toward the center of town, breathing in the moonlight air and swinging his cane. Night and the streets always made him feel better. He remembered the boulevards of Paris and the Unter den Linden. He remembered Tauber singing Wein der Stadt meiner Träume. His mind went back to the lights and music of the cities of Europe. How like a dream that he had ever been in Europe at all, he thought. Ma never had any money. Her kids had barely managed to get through the grade school. There was no higher school for Negroes in Hopkinsville. For him, there had been only a minstrel show to run away with for further education. Then that chance with the jazz band going to Berlin, and his violin for his mistress all the time, with the best teachers his earnings could pay for abroad. Jazz at night and the classes in the morning, hard work and hard practice until his violin sang like nobody's business. Music, real music. Then he began to cough in Berlin. Roy was passing lots of people now in the brightness of the main street, but he saw none of them. He saw only dreams and memories, and heard music. Some of the people stopped to stare and grin at the flare of the European coat on his slender brown body, spats and a cane on a young nigger in Hopkinsville, Missouri. "What's the big deal, huh?" A little white boy or two called, "Hey, coon!" But everything might have been all right. Folks might only have laughed or commented and cussed. Had not a rather faded woman in a cheap coat and a red hat, a white woman, stepping out of the drugstore just as Roy passed, bowed pleasantly to him. "Good evening." Roy started, bowed, nodded. "Good evening, Miss Reese," and was glad to see her. Forgetting he wasn't in Europe, he took off his hat and his gloves and held out his hand to this lady who understood music. They smiled at each other, the sick young colored man and the aging music teacher, in the light of the main street. Then she asked him if he was still working on the Sarastat. "Yes," Roy said, "it's lovely." "And have you heard that marvelous Heifetz record of it?" Miss Reese inquired. Roy opened his mouth to reply when he saw the woman's face suddenly grow pale with horror. Before he could turn around to learn what her eyes had seen, he felt a fist like a ton of bricks strike his jaw. There was a flash of lightning in his brain as his head hit the edge of the plate glass window of the drugstore. Miss Reese screamed. The sidewalk filled with white ruffians, with rednecks, open sweaters and fists doubled up to strike. The movies had just let out, and the crowd passing by and seeing objected to a Negro talking to a white woman, insulting a white woman, attacking a white woman, raping a white woman. They saw Roy remove his gloves and bow, and Miss Reese screamed after Roy had been struck. They were sure he had been making love to her, and before the story got beyond the rim of the crowd, Roy had been trying to rape her right there on Main Street in front of the brightly lighted windows of the drugstore. Yes, he did, too. Yes, sir. So they knocked Roy down. They trampled on his hat and cane and gloves as a dozen men tried to get to him to pick him up, or someone else could have the pleasure of knocking him down again. They struggled over the privilege of knocking him down. Roy looked up from the sidewalk at the white mob around him. His mouth was full of blood, and his eyes burned. His clothes were dirty. He wondered why Miss Reese had stopped to ask him about Sarasate. He knew he would never get home to his mother now. Someone jerked him to his feet. Someone spat in his face. It looked like his old playmate, Charlie Mumford. Somebody cussed him for being a nigger, and another kicked him from behind, and all the men and boys in the lighted street began to yell and scream like mad people and snarl like dogs, and to pull at the little Negro in spats they were dragging through the town toward the woods. The little Negro, whose name was Roy Williams, began to choke on the blood in his mouth, and the roar of their voices and the scuff of their feet were split by the moonlight into 1,000 notes like a Beethoven sonata, and when the white folks left, his brown body stark naked, strung from a tree at the edge of town, it hung there all night like a violin for the wind to play. And that's the end.